And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska marine weather, what we can look forward to coming up through the midweek period. First, though, we'll look at the sea ice edge. Ice is becoming a little more extensive now from the mouth of the Mackenzie River along the Arctic coast there, the Beaufort Sea, and then down along areas of the northwest coast around Point Lay down to Point Hope. And there are areas of ice in through parts of Kotzebue, Norton Sound, and even down toward Kuskokwim Bay. But we've had a lot of wind and wave action that's tended to break up some of the early ice development, and we're going to continue to have wind and wave action working on this early season ice. So don't look for anything really to take hold anytime soon, even though some colder air is going to be coming down in on north winds on the backside of low pressure here along the west coast and eastern Bering as we go through the end of this week and weekend. So by the time we get into early Wednesday morning, primary storm force low is out here in the central Bering, a little triple point low developing, and a secondary low, triple point low taking shape near Kodiak Island. These two, one in the central Bering and the one at Kodiak Island, become the main low, so that by Wednesday afternoon, the main low will make landfall into the southwest coast around the lower Yukon Delta, a little north of Nunavik Island, and then we'll have the secondary low here out over the western Gulf. There's going to be quite a push of moisture on up into the western and central interior with this occluded front working inland. Winter storm warnings in effect here. We have high surf advisories from just east of Utqiagvik running all along the Chukchi Sea coastline, and then the Seward coastline, Norton Sound, and the lower Yukon Delta also high surf advisories. And the areas of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays, we have coastal flood advisories, the potential for some minor coastal flooding due to the strong wind and wave action combining with the high tides. Water levels could run as much as 4 to 5 feet above normal high tide as a result of this setup. The secondary cold front with this low will be pushing southeastward, bringing in that colder air here as we go through later Thursday. We'll start to see that colder air filtering down through the Bering Strait, and it'll be more prevalent as we go into Friday and over the weekend. That'll allow colder air to spread across a good chunk of the mainland. Meanwhile, this low here will take shape and lift northward and kind of combine with this system, and that's what's going to help pull down the colder air. But along through the Panhandle, we're going to have coastal rains and some intermountain snows, and this next couple of systems will just keep that going here through the end of the week, along with breezy conditions as well. So looking at the inner channels here of the Panhandle on Wednesday, southeast winds 15 to 20 knots, waves generally 3 to 4 feet, Lynn Canal down through Stevens Passage, Dixon Entrance. The outer coast winds especially get up around Sitka northeastward, south winds to 25 knots. They're going to shift more toward the east and increase to 35 knot gales at Cape Suckling. Waves generally 8-9 feet, but a bit higher there off of Cape Suckling, maybe as much as 12 feet. For Thursday, look for south winds of 20 to 25 knots with waves 4 to 5 feet through the inner channels. The outer coast winds will be west-southwest around 20 knots with waves of 8 to maybe as high as 11 feet outside of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling. The northwestern Gulf, we have 40 to 45 knot gale force winds here outside of Hinchinbrook Entrance, east of Kayak Island with waves of 12 feet. Lower Cook Inlet in the entrance, we are looking at 35 knot gales out of the east with waves 8 to 9 feet. For Thursday, things are going to switch around after that low pressure works its way through. Winds will be south-southwesterly across Prince William Sound, Upper Cook Inlet, 20-25 knots, waves 3, 4, 5 feet. Strongest winds will be off the Kenai out and through the northwestern Gulf and coming out of Lower Cook Inlet, 35 to 40 knot westerly gales with waves running generally up around 10, 13 feet. Now, stronger winds are going to impact the southeast corner of the Bering Sea on Wednesday. We have storm force winds associated with that frontal system that'll be lifting up through Kuskokwim Bay and Bristol Bays. Look for 25 to 35 knot winds across Kodiak Island on Wednesday. Those increase to 45 to 50 knot storm force winds on the Bering side north of Cold Bay, and waves generally running 9 to 10 feet on the east side of the Alaska Peninsula in the North Pacific. South of False Pass, though, those 45-knot southwest gales, winds, waves up to 16 feet, and waves could exceed 20 feet there, north of Cold Bay with those storm force winds. And then on Thursday, with the cold front that'll be swinging across the Alaska Peninsula, we're going to see winds, west winds around 35 knots in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, and they'll generally be west-northwest 25 to 30 knots across the Alaska Peninsula. On the North Pacific side, waves 5-6 feet, a little higher up there just off of Kodiak Island and Chiknik, maybe 12 feet. But then areas north of Cold Bay and in that corner there of the Bering, waves could be in excess of 10, 13 feet-ish. And so colder air coming on in could also lead to some snow showers, especially there as we go through Friday. And then here's the way it looks across the eastern Aleutians. The strongest winds are going to move through and north of the central Aleutians this Tuesday night. That's why there is a high wind warning in effect for Adak and Atka for this Tuesday night and Wednesday morning. Winds could gust as high as 80 miles an hour. Those storm force winds will shift eastward during the day Wednesday. And we're looking at storm force winds from the southwest, upwards of 50 knots in the eastern Aleutians, with waves running right around 25 feet. As we go further west, those winds fall back off to around 40 and eventually 25 to 30 knot west-northwest winds west of Kiska on through Shemya. And for Thursday, winds come down across the Aleutian chain. We're looking at the eastern central Aleutians, generally northwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Waves come back down to 7 to 12 feet on the North Pacific side and still running up around 12, 13 feet on the Bering side. So Wednesday, here come those strong winds up into Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. We'll see southeast winds turn south and then southwest. That's going to cause the potential for some minor coastal flooding. That's why there is that coastal flood advisory for these areas. And then along the outside here of lower Yukon Delta in the Norton Sound, we have a high surf advisory. You can see these strong winds. 50-knot southwest winds with waves upwards around 25 feet, St. Paul, St. George. On the backside, winds turn northerly at St. Paul to 45 knots ahead of the low. We expect 30 to 35 knot south winds initially, with 6 to 7 feet along the lower Yukon Delta. And then for Thursday, once the low moves inland, winds go north and then northwest. Still in areas along the coast, 35 to 40 knot gale force winds. Waves running around 10 feet. Just outside the protection of the immediate coastline there of Bristol and Kuskokwim Bays, and then off of the lower Yukon Delta. Northwest winds to 30 knots, St. Matthew, St. Paul, with waves right around 14, 15 feet. And winds Wednesday, quite strong, 40-knot gale force northerly winds as high as 45 knots north side of St. Lawrence, waves running anywhere from 10 to 17 feet. Those winds fall off, though, the further northwestward you get. North to northeast winds, 15 knots off of Point Lay to Utqiagvik, and then more easterly, 15-knot winds Kaktovik to Prudhoe Bay, where ice is in place. And then on Thursday, look for north-northwest winds around 15 knots along the Beaufort Sea coastline. As we drop down through the Chukchi Sea, winds pick up again out of the north at first 25, but once we get through the Bering Strait, look for those winds to accelerate 35 to 40 knot gales with waves running 12 to 15 feet. So there'll definitely be a continuation of some pretty strong wind and wave action, drawing down that colder air from eastern Russia, the Chukchi Sea, and all that colder air will be eventually winding down along the southwest coast and across the portions of the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians as we go into Friday.